Hey guys, what's going on? Today I have a brand new deck profile for you. It's not going to be budget at all, unfortunately, because it uses quite some expensive cards. Some that I still don't own and some that I probably won't own for a while until they get a reprint, such as Baron. But today I'm going to actually bring you to a new vampire deck profile, especially since the new support came out in Battles of Chaos, such as Vampire Ghost, Fascinator, and the Zombie Vampire, which really boosts the strategy and allows you to do some wacky things with the deck now. It allows you to have some board breaking potential by kaijuing your opponents by having Zombie World on the field along with Sucker. And it also allows you to build a pretty good monster negate heavy board and maybe one Omni negate from a vampire domination. But besides that, let's get right into the deck profile. So let's get right into it. First off, we're going to start with the new zombie support, which is triple Vampire Ghost. This card is absolutely necessary in the deck. It's one of the best starters that you can actually have besides like a Unizombie in this deck, because of the fact that it's basically, when you summon it, it discards from hand, adds from deck to hand, and then foolishes from deck. So basically it's a better Unizombie, especially for vampires. In addition to this, we're going to be running triple Vampire Familiar, and then we're going to be running triple Vampire Retainer, which is the normal vampire lineup usually. Ghost plus any one of these is usually full combo, because if you get Ghost plus Familiar, what you can do is like normal summon Ghost, discard Familiar, and even if they ash you, you actually have insane follow-up, because what you can do is you can basically activate Ghost effect, toss Familiar, they ash you or whatever happens, effect Veiler, which is fine because it actually discards as cost, which Unizombie actually doesn't. So you would discard the Familiar as cost, it would get negated, then what you can do is you can trigger the Familiar to tribute the Ghost, summon the Familiar from the graveyard to your field, pay 500 life points, and add a vampire, like a shadow vampire, and then you can activate the Ghost effect in the graveyard to pay 500 and immediately extra normal summon, and then you kind of have your line going. So besides these 9 starters, we're going to be playing some more in the vampire package. So to round off our vampire package, we're going to be playing 1 Fraulein, we're going to be playing 1 Shadow Vampire, we're going to be playing 1 Grace, 2 Scarlet Scourge, and a Voivode. This lineup's pretty strong, I'd say. At first, I was originally running 2 of the Shadow Vampire, but unfortunately, in grind games, it never really came up. It's only good if you're going first, because the Shadow Vampire will usually just lock you and you can't attack for the turn, which is not great going second. So most of the time, you would just choose a play to use Vampire Scarlet Scourge here instead of the Shadow Vampire. Besides that, we're running the Fraulein as like last case battle disruption. And the Voivode comes up a lot, especially with the new Zombie Vampire, because it's very strong, especially since it's level 8, and whatever you can summon from your opponent's graveyard, since it steals 2, is level 8. You can also use the Desires to modulate a Retainer to level 8 and toss this to the graveyard and revive it with Scourge to make a Zombie Vampire, which is really strong also. So I think this is the right ratio. You want to have the 1 Fraulein, the 1 Shadow Vampire for going first. You want the Grace for extension purposes, because what you can do is you can Ghost it to your hand and then Familiar it to get rid of the Grace in your hand to add a Shadow Vampire, then extra normal. The extra normal would allow you to summon the Shadow Vampire by tributing the Familiar on the field, summoning out the Scarlet Scourge, which can then revive any of your vampires that you have, not necessarily Grace, but then when you revive another vampire, or if you want to, you can revive the Grace, you basically get 2 level 6 access, always, and then you can just make Beatrice and you can get your access to Zombie World, because Zombie World's the win condition mostly for this deck. So that rounds off our vampire lineup of monsters. In the Vampire Spell and Traps, we run 2 Vampire's Domain, a Desires, and a Domination. The Domain is very good as long as you have an extra vampire, of course. It's actually a very good fodder, because what you can do is you can activate the Domain, pay the 500 life points, and even if it leaves the field, you still get the extra vampire normal summon. So what you can do, for say, is you can take for example, let's say we have Vampire Familiar, and that's in our graveyard. You can activate the Domain, pay the 500 life points, get the extra normal summon for the turn. Then you can activate Familiar to tribute the Domain, and summon the familiar, pay 500 life points, add a Scarlet Scourge, for example, or like a Shadow Vampire, then because you have the extra normal summon, even if this is off the field, you can tribute the Vampire Familiar to summon out your Shadow Vampire, which can get you into your combos. Because it doesn't necessarily have to summon the Scarlet Scourge, you can summon any vampire. So that's one of the most common things that you can do with the vampires. That's why I like playing Domain at 2. Desires is a great extender, but unfortunately it's a poor starter, so that's why we only run it at 1. If we were playing maybe like, if there was one more better vampire, it would probably be good to bump it to 2. But since you have the Desires, since you can add it off of the Retainer instead of the Omni if you don't want the Omni, you can basically go into your zombie vampire plays with this, which is really good. So that rounds off the whole entire vampire side of the deck. Now we're going to be getting into kind of the more expensive part, unfortunately, because all the vampire stuff is extremely cheap. Unfortunately, this next part isn't, because it hasn't had a lot of reprints. So here's the most important card in the deck. Zombie World. Zombie World's extremely busted this format, especially with Flunder being in a great deck, because Zombie World basically prevents Flunder from playing the moment you set it or activate it, because they cannot tribute except zombie monsters, so it doesn't allow them to summon out their M-Pen, their Apex Avians, it doesn't allow them to summon their Dark Simorgs or their Ryzas, which is really busted. It's a great lockdown card. Unfortunately, this card really loses hard to like Eldritch, because they don't care about stuff being zombies or not, because they're a zombie deck. So basically you're against another zombie deck if you're playing against Eldritch, and unfortunately that's probably one of the worst matchups you can have, because this does nothing to it. It actually helps the deck a lot, because you might be able to give them some zombie specific stuff like a Sucker or something. So after the Zombie Worlds, we're going to be running the standard package of triple Shiranui Solitaire. Then we're also going to be running the triple Unizombie package. These are great starters in the deck. They're not as good as Ghost. Ghost is amazing as long as you have another vampire in hand, like a vampire card, because unfortunately with Solitaire and Unizombie, they're hand trap magnets. You're going to most definitely get Effect Veiler, you're going to get Ashed, you're going to get Impermed. It is the lay of the road or lay of the land when it comes to like Unizombie and Solitaire. Solitaire is great, don't get me wrong. The fact that you can trigger it and summon out the Unizombie, it's really good. It can also summon out Ash Blossom, or it can summon out like a Ghost Bell, for example. But besides that, like, I like this card, but unfortunately, since it is such a target for hand traps, I wish there was a better alternative, like more ghosts, but there isn't. So you run these 3. It also gives you extreme tuner access, because sometimes you might need to make that synchro play, or you can use it to go into your Hulk plays and just go for normal zombie lines. What else we're going to be running is we're going to be running like a double Mizuki and then a 1 Gozuki. My logic behind the double Mizuki, or Meizuki, or however you pronounce it, is the fact that it's a great extender, because it revives any of the vampires, so it can give you follow-up. And same with Gozuki, because sometimes you might just have a hand that's very, like, bricked out in, like, your, like, let's say you have, like, a Unizombie, and you have, like, and that's all. And you only have a send from the deck, and you have nothing but bricks. You can send the Gozuki sometimes to get your combo started, because then you can banish a zombie in the graveyard and special summon a vampire from your hand, which comes up sometimes. It can also be a great extender in addition to like Meizuki, because you can mill it off of the zombie vampire now and kind of guarantee yourself some like extension. Besides this, we're going to be running 1 Jacobolin, and then it's all right. It can basically set off your Meizukis that you have. It can get your vampires to the grave if you really need it. Like, let's say you have a Retainer. Unfortunately, with Retainer, you can't, like, Almond Raj it to the graveyard. So what you'd have to do is you'd have to activate Jacobolin to toss the Retainer to the grave, and then you'd be able to do Retainer combos if you have another vampire in your hand. So Jacobolin's kind of like an unbrick, And also, it just sets up your stuff for next turn, because since we're playing 2 Scarlet Scourge, what you can do is, during your opponent's turn, if you summon this, and like, let's say there's nothing much else that you have, like you've ran out of like resources, what you can do is you can banish this, summon back your Scarlet Scourge, then summon out like a familiar to have like follow-up with a vampire monster like Ghost, or you can actually summon out the Retainer to also have follow-up. So it's a good one of. I don't think it's worth running more than one. I think at 2 it'd be a brick, so I think at 1 it's the best option. And then to round off our monster lineup, we have the basic Zombie World package, which is 1 Glow Up Bloom, 1 Necroworld Banshee, and 1 Balor. I don't need to explain this that much. So one of the most common like combo lines that you have is you can basically, you can do your vampire line, get into a Beatrice, and you can Beatrice on your first turn the Banshee. The Banshee will activate the Zombie World, which is really good. And then on your next turn, on your opponent's standby, what you can do is you can activate the Beatrice, send Ballardrock, and then it will come back because it's still during standby. Or if you really wanted to, you can, like, let's say you have like I don't know, you have something else you want to bring. Like, let's say you have Ballardrock already on the field because you did your combo, but you don't have a Glow Bloom yet that's been used. What you can do is you can send the Glow Bloom to summon out like a Jackabolin to have like follow-up. Or if you don't want to use the Glow Bloom, you can actually use the second Beatrice send to send like a Mizuki for follow-up in case they wipe your board. I don't have them on me right now. They're in another deck, but I'm just going to use it as a substitute here. Let me grab these. So, for example, like these 3 cards here. Oh, that's black. That's not going to show up well. Yes, this will show up well. So these 3 cards can be any of the Ghost Girls. Whether you want to run Ghost Belle, or you want to run Ash Blossom, or if you want to run Ghost Mortar and Moonlit Chill, all the Ghost Girls are really good in this deck, especially because your Shiranui Solitaire can summon them from deck if you really need to. You can also get them off Hulk plays, and sometimes you might need like that level 3 besides Unizombie, because you don't want to you kind of want to keep the Unizombies in deck in case you want to top deck it, because it's your best top deck. So the Ghost Girls are just also really strong because Ash Blossom's all right in this format. So is Ghost Mourner. Ghost Belle's all right. Ghost Belle kind of helps stop like PK at times, but still, like it stops the it can help stop your I think the BA line. But I basically would run 3 Ghost Girls. I have the triple Ash, it's just in my Flunder deck, so here would be the placeholders for triple Ash. And that rounds off the whole entire main deck. Let's get off into the extra deck now. First off, we're going to be running a single Linkuriboh. Linkuriboh is extremely good in this deck in case you don't, like let's say you open Familiar and Retainer. Let me grab them. So if you open up like, let's say a Familiar and a Retainer, that's full combo for your deck, because what you can do is you can normal summon Familiar, link it off for Linkuriboh, which makes it go to the grave, then you can activate Familiar to toss the Retainer to grave to summon out your Familiar again. At this point, you can activate Familiar's effect and be able to get yourself like a, from here I'd probably get myself like a Grace or something. Or if you really can, what you can probably do is get yourself like, if you have another vampire card in the hand, because unfortunately this is like you would need a 3rd vampire card, you can get yourself a Shadow Vampire. Then what you can do is activate this, toss the other vampire card that's not Shadow Vampire in your hand, and then summon this. You can activate Vampire Retainer's effect to get the domain, activate the domain, pay the 500, and then you would be able to basically summon out the Shadow Vampire by tributing one of these, and then go full combo. That's why the Linkuriboh is so important in the deck. It's a necessary card that you have to run. Other than the Linkuriboh, we're running a Beatrice, which is also equally as important. These are extremely necessary in the deck. Then we're running 2 Vampire Suckers, because in case the first one gets outed, the second one can usually come up with tribute foddering your opponent. Then we're running a, Vampire Fascinator, one of the new cards. Fascinator is really good because it can steal one of your opponent's monsters from their grave, and which can also allow you, if you have like a Voivode or if you have a Scarlet Scourge on the field, it will allow you to go into any of your rank 6s or your rank 8 vampires, since they treat their opponent's monsters as those levels. In the last two vampire cards that we'll actually be running is Dampier Vampire Sheridan and the Zombie Vampire. Sheridan's great because what you can do is you can detach one material, send one of your opponent's monsters to the graveyard. It's targeting, which kind of stinks, but it's also it's a targeting non-destruction or a non-banish. So it can help you get over some troublesome cards that have indestructible effects. And the and then when it goes to the graveyard, you can summon it back, which is really good. Zombie Vampire is an insane extender in the deck because it mills 4 from both of your decks and will allow you to summon one of those that were milled, which is really good because you can mill the Meizuki and you can mill the Gozuki for extension, but you can also mill like a Ballardrock or anything, or even someone like a big monster of theirs, like if they're playing Blue Eyes, steal the Blue Eyes just for the sake of it, and then just beat over them, because this is 3k, and that's kind of big. Besides that, we're going to be running one Avenger Savior, and for the last Link monster I'm just going to show it is going to be Hulk. Unfortunately, Hulk is really important in this deck, and this is why the deck kind of gets expensive, because you're running like the Necroworld Banshee, you're running the Ballardrock, you're running the Globe Bloom, you have to run Hulk because the Hulk basically guarantees zombie combos if you have Unizombie. The price adds up. I had a lot of these cards and I built it over time. I had it before the price hikes, unfortunately, but I mean, there's not much you can do. Hulk is very necessary in this deck. Then for the Synchro Monsters that we're going to be running one Psyframe Lord Omega, one Red Eyes Zombie Necro Dragon, a Formula Synchron to go with the Crystron Halka Fibrex plays, and then the Shiranui Sun Saga. This is probably like the standard lineup that you'd want. The most expensive card being Hulk, unfortunately. Everything else is not that expensive, I'd say. Like Zombie Vampire is going for like 8 right now. Sucker's like 6 or 7. But the prices add up, of course. But if you notice, I'm playing only that 7 here and that 6 here. So I'm only playing, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm playing 13 cards in my extra deck. I don't own it, but the best target that you could have off your, like, if you use your Ballardrock, for example, you use the Negate, you use the Banish, and you have the Hulk on the field, you would activate Hulk's effect to summon out the Formula Synchron, draw a card, and then Formula Synchron quick effect, Synchro summon. From here, because I don't have it at the moment, I'm just using Sun Saga, because Sun Saga is pretty strong, because you usually will get like one destruction, and it can protect itself by banishing a solitaire that's in the graveyard. In the 14th slot, I would play Baron if you have it. Baron is by far one of the best cards in this deck, especially since it's an Omni, and the deck doesn't have many Omnis besides the one trap, which is the Vampire Omni. But once they blow through that, if they hit you with like, I don't know, like a Lightning Storm, you're done, because you have no spell negations at all, which kind of sucks. And in the 15th slot, I was siding out Super Poly and throwing in the Necroworld Dragon. I just don't have it in here because I'm not playing Super Poly at the moment. Besides that, this is the deck. I think it's very competent. I think it has some pretty good play lines and can put out some pretty impressive fields. So let me just show you some real quick combos. I'll just grab a few cards. So let's say I have just Familiar and a Ghost. I think this would be full combo, these two. What you could do is you can normal summon your Ghost and toss Familiar to the grave. That's going to be my grave here, because I don't have that much space. Off of Ghost's effect, you will be able to add to your hand a Grace, and then you will dump a Retainer. From here, what you can do is you can activate Familiar, tossing the Grace to the graveyard to summon the Familiar, and then activate Familiar's effect, paying 500. Off of Familiar's effect, you will add to your hand a Shadow Vampire. From here, you have 2 cards in your graveyard. What you'll do is you'll activate Retainer, and you can activate Retainer, pitching the Ghost to the grave to summon the Retainer. Retainer's effect will go off. At this point, you're at a crossroads. You can either get an Omni Negate that you know you might need depending upon like the matchup, which if you don't have Baron, I would suggest this. But if we want to go like a crazy like extension route, we're gonna add Desires. Off of this now, we can activate Vampire Desires, targeting our Retainer. So this goes to the grave, and from here, we're going to dump to our graveyard a Voivode. Now Retainer's level becomes level 8. From here, we're going to banish Ghost, and then Ghost's effect will allow us to basically quick normal summon. Quick effect normal summon. And then what we're going to do is we're going to normal summon by tributing the Familiar for the Shadow Vampire. This will get banished because you've already summoned it off its effect once that way, and Shadow Vampire will go off now. If you look in our graveyard, we have Grace and Voivode, which is really strong now. What we can do here, and let me just move these to make some better room. From here, we will be able to summon out Scarlet Scourge. Scarlet Scourge's effect will go off, paying 1,000, and we're going to actually target Voivode and summon it. But that's going to be Chain Link 1. Chain Link 2, we're going to actually chain Grace because we summoned it off the effect of a vampire, of a zombie monster that's higher than level 5. Because Grace says that when a level 5 or higher zombie monster special summon to the side of the field by the effect of a zombie type monster while it's card in your graveyard, pay 2,000 and special summon it. So we get to summon out Grace and Voivode. Unfortunately, I'm running out of space a little bit. I think that's fine. From here, since we have Desires in the graveyard, that's not going to really do us much anymore, but we basically have a crazy field right now. And let's just say this is the banished pile, so I'm going to say that this is graveyard, this is banished. From here, we have a few things that we can do. This is level 8, and this is level 8, and these are level 6s. So from here, we're going to start off by basically getting a Beatrice and putting it under the link zone, because we don't want to screw up our link zones. We're going to special summon the Beatrice, and then we're going to activate Beatrice by detaching the Grace, in case we want to use it the next turn. Beatrice's effect will go off and will allow us to actually dump the Necroworld Banshee to the grave. We can activate Necroworld Banshee, and we can activate a Zombie World. From here, we have a few things that we can do. What I would most likely do, depending upon the board state and seeing what they have, I would be able to overlay the Voivode and the Retainer, because then we won't lose our Retainer because it was detached as XD material into a zombie vampire. From here, I would activate the zombie vampire's effect, detaching the Retainer to the grave, and then I would start milling. So you mill 4. And like, let's say that from here, I milled a, just for example, like let's say I was really lucky and I milled a Glow Up Bloom, and I milled a Meizuki, and just 2 random cards. So I'm just gonna say it's 2 Shiranui Solitaires. From here, this is actually extremely strong, especially if you mill Solitaire or you mill a Unizombie. So like, let's say it wasn't 2 Solitaires. Let's say it was a Solitaire and a Unizombie. This is actually extremely busted at the moment, because what you can do is, because you milled these 4, you can summon one of these. What I would do is I would summon the Unizombie at this point, and then these would go to the grave. From here, Glow Up Bloom will trigger, which will allow you to banish it to summon out the best monster in your deck, Baylor, which is really nuts. So if you see at this point, we're already like, wow, we have Baylor, we have Beatrice, we have Zombie Vampire, and we have a Meizuki in the graveyard for extension at this point. From here, what you can actually do, which would be kind of fun, is you can activate Unizombie's effect, and from here, if we already have a Meizuki in the graveyard, I would actually dump a second Meizuki, because now because it's not a once per turn. From here, I would target that would be targeting the Balor, increasing its level to 9, which really doesn't matter at this point. From here, we actually have Unizombie and Shadow Vampire, which is actually level 8. So we can synchro these 2 into a Cyframe Lord Omega. which is nuts because what we can do is guarantee that we have Zombie World for the next turn. If somebody manages to destroy a Zombie World, what we can do is during standby, return our Necro World Banshee back to our grave and basically have prevention for our Zombie World being destroyed at least once. At this point, what we do have is we have the Balor on the field and we have the 2 Mezukis in grave. What I would do is I would most likely banish the Mezuki, summon back any of these, most likely, it really doesn't matter. You can summon back the Shadow Vampire, and then you can end your combo off by grabbing yourself the Vampire Sucker. Oh, can't see that. So, off of a 2-card combo and getting lucky with some mills off the Zombie Vampire, you basically ended with... These are all banished, but mind you... Well, Grace is not banished, sorry. That's in the grave. You ended up with these banished, which would be your Mezuki, your Glow Bloom, your Necroworld Banshee, your Familiar, and your Ghost. However, one of these can come back off your Omega, and most likely what you would do is you would turn... So if we go into standby, like let's say we go into standby, we're going to activate Omega. Omega's going to return Banshee, and then we're going to activate the Balor in grave. Balor will summon itself back, and off of that, we get a draw from our sucker. So like, let's just say we draw like 1 random card. So that would be our hand. So you basically, and then we also have the 1 send off the Beatrice. So depending upon what else you have, what you can do is you can basically send a Familiar if you wanted to have follow-up, because you already have a Retainer in the graveyard, and you have a Grace also. So if you have at least one way of summoning another vampire, you basically can rebuild your board, which is really good, and you can also break boards, because what you can do, like let's say that, for example, that the last card in my hand is a Scarlet Scourge. This is where it gets nutty. What you can do is, since we already have the Balor in the grave, well, we have the Balor coming back, you can activate Beatrice, detaching your Scarlet Scourge, to actually send a Vampire Ghost. And since we have Scarlet Scourge in our grave, or we have Scarlet Scourge in our hand right here, so this is our hand, we have Zombie World on the field, and we have a Vampire Sucker. What you can do is you can quick effect activate Vampire Ghost, banish it, tribute one of their monsters to summon the Scarlet Scourge. Which is absolutely nuts. Like, this deck has so much potential. Unfortunately, you can't go into the Barone here, but that's fine. I mean, usually you have basically 1 monster negate, you have 1 banish, you have a hand rip, you have a draw, you have basically a tribute, and you have follow-up for the next turn. And you have Zombie World, and they can't really get rid of your Zombie World. So if you're playing against Flunder, they can't break this board. It's too hard to. The only thing you lose to, unfortunately, is like a Lightning Storm, because you don't have any Omnis right now. And you wouldn't be able, like if you had went for the, what was it called? If you had gone for the line where you have the Omni from the trap, you wouldn't have been able to do the Zombie Vampire combo, and you wouldn't be able to get out the Omega, for example. But usually this is, I would say that this definitely is probably one of the best boards that they can put up. It is very hard to beat through all these monsters, especially if they're not running like mass destruction. So I think this deck actually has some quite competent, like, it has really good power scaling with the new support that they gave it. The Zombie Vampire is an insane extender, and I'm so happy that they gave it to this deck. And Vampire Ghost is basically just fixes all the problems that you ever had with vampires being in your hand. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this deck profile. I hope you also enjoyed this combo. It wasn't really linear. I mean, off the 2 cards, you still get a very good board. Off of, like, let's say, for example, the 2 cards. I know what I wouldn't be able to do, and I know what I would be able to do. Like, let's say all else failed, and you were just left with the Beatrice from the combo, from just the Grace and the Scarlet Scourge. So let me just attach them underneath. If you just had the Grace and the Scarlet Scourge underneath, what you can do is usually, like, this is your weakest board you'll end with, which is still very strong, and you'll have the Vampire Domination. So you have the Omni Negate set, and you have the Zombie World, and you won't have the Zombie World yet. What you can do is activate Beatrice, dumping the Grace, and you'd be able to send to your graveyard the Necroworld Banshee, then activate Banish Necroworld Banshee, and you would be able to activate your Zombie World. At this point, you would enter into your opponent's phase. Your opponent's draw phase. On draw phase, what you can choose to do, or it doesn't really matter at this point. You can save the glow up bulb for later. Like if you knew that you didn't want to activate during standby because you thought that they had some sort of interruption, what you can do is later in the turn activate Beatrice, detaching the Scarlet Scourge, and send the glow up bulb, or glow up bloom, sorry, to banish itself to summon your Baylor. And from this standpoint, and then you draw one, which is pretty good, I'd say. From this standpoint, you basically have one Omni Negate, you have one Monster Negate, and one Banish, and they're already under Zombie World, which is hard enough to deal with already. What you can also do is during standby, you don't have to send the Glow Bloom. What you can just do is send the Balor, and then the Baylor comes back because it's standby. And it does the same exact thing. It's just depending upon the timing that you want to work for. Whether you want it to be like a big interruption play, or you don't want them to know that you have access to your Baylor yet. But yeah, this is still even a competent board. If you had Hulk, you'd be able to basically have one Omni, you'd have a draw 2, and then you would have a Monster Negate, a Banish, and then when you went into Baron, you'd be able to go into one more Omni, which is very, very strong. The only issue with the deck is it loses very hard to like initial like reactions. It loses to like initial hand traps such as like I'd say Ash, Effect Baylor, Infinite Impermanence. That's why the Unizombie is kind of weak at times, and you kind of need the extenders. And the domain of the Vampire's domain is really nuts because it just helps you like extend out if you have to. But I hope you guys enjoyed this deck profile and hope you enjoyed these small combos. And hopefully I'll come back with another cool deck profile, and hope you all enjoy. Next time it might be Flunders, but it also might be something a little bit more interesting. See ya. Oh yeah, P.S. I was really dumb and I forgot to mention 2 things. Play 1-for-1 and Foolish Burial. Yeah, I forgot. I set those off to the side and totally forgot about them. Whoopsies. Yeah. Sorry.